How did I get here? I have to be 100% honest with everybody. I'm pretty excited about today. One, as of this recording, it is Halloween, my favorite holiday of the year. And two, it is my very first time participating and being involved in the 31 on 31 discussion with CP, Cody, Brian, and Sean. So it's exciting for me. I've loved this type of collaboration. I've seen it for years as a fan. Now I'm part of it. So this is a big fucking deal for me. So thank you for watching. And if I can be 100% honest with everybody, I was always intimidated to ask if I could participate in this 31 on 31 because as a creator, it is a phenomenal task to watch 31 movies, film 31 reviews, and edit 31 clips. So it's a huge task that I always felt that I wasn't ready for, and I was just holding myself back. And this was, I wish the choice of films was a little bit, as far as quality, a lot better, but I got through it. And I really had a great time being part of this, and I can't wait to show you what I have. And just to give everybody the heads up on how the schedule is going to unfold today, I'm kicking everything off. I'm the opener, and all the times I'm going to give you are Eastern Standard Time, okay? So again, me right now, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard. Sean Chandler is going to be at 4 p.m. Brian's going to be at 5 p.m. CP is going to be at 6 p.m. And then the main headliner himself, that handsome son of a bitch, Cody, is going to be at 8 p.m. tonight. And of course, support these young men, subscribe, like, make some comments. They have a bright future ahead of them. They show a lot of promise. And I think they're going to be great YouTubers in the future, these guys, especially Sean. But in all seriousness, I feel like I'm about to say live from New York. It's Saturday night. Let's kick off this Halloween 2023 and our 31 on 31 pain and suffering list with my list. Let's do it. Woohoo! Starting with 31. Coming in at the absolute worst of the worst, the bottom of the barrel, complete trash, I'm talking mouth herpes here, is Hellraiser Revelations. Two college friends go to Mexico to have a good time and have some sex and unwittingly release Pinhead and its minions, but this is not Pinhead, this is Walmart Pinhead, wannabe Pinhead. And let's just face it, at this point, Dimension Films doesn't give a shit. The budget for this film, believe it or not, was only $300,000, which more or less tells you this is a cash grab. They're trying to milk the Hellraiser franchise for what it's worth by investing as little as they can, and it reflects completely on film, on screen. Out of all the Hellraiser movies that I saw this past week, this one was the absolute worst for many reasons, and here's why. The writing in this film is absolutely atrocious, especially with lines like this.
It doesn't matter anymore, you're home.
Not that simple, Mother.
And let's be honest, I don't really blame the actors at this point. They're more or less doing their job and reading the lines that they're given. And the shooting for this film was only 2 weeks. And as far as production design, there's only really 2 locations this film takes place in. There's a restroom in Tijuana, a bedroom, and a home. That's it. And if I can be honest, there's many lines in horror movies that I don't want to cross. I don't want to see women get raped. I don't want to see old people getting killed. And I don't want to see babies getting killed. And this film didn't show it, but you got to hear a baby get choked to death and then his little neck get broken. At that point, I didn't give a shit about this film. And that is why this film is at the bottom of the heap, listed at 31. I do not recommend this film. Don't waste your time. It is garbage. Trash. Basura. Coming in at number 30 is Wrong Turn Part 5, which I will admit has one of my favorite title sequences. A group of college students on a trip to the Mountain Man Festival on Halloween in West Virginia encounter a clan of cannibals. And also there's the appearance of Hellraiser himself, Mr. Pinhead, Doug Bradley. He's in the film, but which I found, yeah, I guess that was a cool type of like intro or maybe cameo, but it made no sense after you've seen the previous 4 because he claims he was with his family for 30 years. I guess he's a type of father figure, serial killer, and it's like a mutual gain or relationship between the two. And it made no sense because there was nothing set up previous before that. I think it was just a gimmick to get more people to watch the movie since it's Doug Bradley, but it didn't work for me. And of course I didn't like this film. Now, being this is the first time I'm speaking about a Wrong Turn movie in this rankings, I want to kind of say this before I move forward. I get that this is a gimmick, it's schlock, but it has its own market and fan base. I totally get that. It's just not for me. Every film more or less is the same thing. Not much goes into the storyline. All the money goes into the effects and the kills, which I will admit are some of the most unique kills I have seen in movies. They're quite fun, especially in this one. I even have written down on my notes here, unique kills, feeding somebody their guts, sledgehammer to the legs, which was pretty cool. The mulch murder I did enjoy, and also cooking somebody in a barrel. God damn. One of the major cons I had about this film is that they're having a Mountain Man music festival. They're supposed to be the equivalent of Coachella and Burning Man festival. But once the movie starts, yes, there's a big populace of extras and it looks like it's going to be a very festive environment, which is pretty cool, especially to have these murders take place within that type of atmosphere. But once the movie starts, everyone's gone. It's totally empty. And it's details like that that I look forward to, especially with films that try to do something different. I'm thinking, oh, it's not just going to be 5 teenagers or 5 young adults. It's going to be possibly hundreds of people they're going to kill. And I thought they were going to go with something kind of robust and something kind of different, but no. And I really hated the way the film ended because you have this woman that's more or less being tortured the entire time by Doug Bradley, Pinhead. He's more or less just telling her what he's going to do to her. He takes out her eyes and she just goes off wandering down the street. And you totally forget about her. Then the film ends with him and his kids. They pick her up and she's blind. She doesn't know where she's at. And the film ends with her just screaming for help. And no. And it kind of goes to credits, which it kind of sucked. I didn't like that ending. I feel really bad for her. I know it's just a movie, but you know, come on. I mean, you've been torturing this poor soul the entire time. And now she's going to be raped and then killed according to what they said and set up. It's like, fuck you, movie. Coming in at 29 is Hellraiser Deader. And I have all my notes right here. Bullet number 1, I'm bored and I don't give 2 fucks. And I'll be honest, the Hellraiser films, I think I've said this before in a previous video, but the first 3 I did see in the movies. I did enjoy the experience, but after 4, that's when they were going direct to video and I checked out. So I hadn't seen 4 through 15. I know there's not 15, but there's a lot of them. This is my first time viewing them. And I did notice a consistent pattern after 5. It's that they, I guess, had a shitload of scripts sitting on a shelf somewhere that were just detective plot points, and they just couldn't think of a way to sell these stories. So they said, you know what? Let's just slap Pinhead on there. Let's call it a Hellraiser movie. Hellraiser, I don't know, Deader. And we'll see, we'll make some money off of it. So they had the original script about a detective, or a journalist in this particular case, investigating a group of people. She had some traumatic past with her father as a child, and they somehow interweave Pinhead into the script. And it's obvious. And you'll hear me repeat this as we continue with the other Hellraisers. Her publisher shows her a videotape, and in this videotape, somebody allegedly gets killed on camera, and then they bring her back to life, kind of like the old movie Flatliners in the 90s. So he sends her off to investigate this, and then that's when everything kind of goes through a whirlwind. What I didn't like about the film is that I really got lost sometimes on what was actually in reality and what was a dream state, because there's a lot of dream sequences, and I got confused. As a matter of fact, there's a train station filled with sadists. I guess that's consistently running 24/7 on a city-based track. And that's where she goes to get more information whenever she's lost and needs a lead. And I was like, okay, is this a dream sequence? I'm not sure. And then they die. And were they always dead? Was that in her head? So again, this movie was very confusing for me to follow up. And again, I will admit, maybe I wasn't paying attention the way I should have the entire time because I was just bored. But too many dream sequences for me to follow. The entire film, again, a kind of a good idea. Investigative journalists kind of going down the deep end and losing their sanity as they can cover more clues. But in this particular film, it didn't work for me, and that's why it's 29. Do I recommend this one? No, unless you have to. Unless you're part of a 31 on 31 and you're forced to see it. That's Hellraiser Deader. Coming in at 28 is Hostel Part 3. This is the first film of the 3 that was not released in theaters, and I can see why. To be completely honest, the film, as far as the torture, because let's think about it, the Hostel films in and of themselves, the selling piece is the torture scenes. It's not really the story that got them there, it's the torture scenes and how perverse it can get, right? This is at the peak of torture porn back in the early 2000s. And this film is tame. It kind of felt like a PG-13 film, the way some of these torture sequences went. I go, that's it? Especially the one kill with that one girl, they're spraying the sugar water in her mouth and you're thinking what's going to happen. And then he just unleashes a bunch of digital cockroaches into her mouth. And I did enjoy the betting ideas that they had with the tortures where this person's going to cry for their family in the first 3 minutes. They had all these windows and boxes that people were betting on, which is pretty horrific and pretty fucked up if you think about it. But I'd love that attention to detail, so I'll give them credit for that. Overall, I enjoyed the experience. Will I revisit this film? No. If you're a fan of the Hostel films, I think you will be like me and be disappointed in the fact that the kills are very tame and there's really not a lot of kills in this movie. And it's really the worst of the 3. So if you want to complete the trilogy, I guess buy it. But in my opinion, you can skip this one. You're really not missing much.
Shut the fuck up.
Coming in at what number are we on? Coming in at number 27 is Wrong Turn 6. Now, believe it or not, I enjoyed this one. I even messaged Cody and CP like, hey, out of the previous 5, I'm starting to like this one. They actually made effort in bringing some sort of like history to what's going on. And Cody said I was a sick fuck because it was just more or less a softcore porno. And he's probably right. Yeah, as a matter of fact, he is right. I did enjoy that part, especially that one room. Anyway, we're off topic, but anyway, Wrong Turn 6. Now, being that I enjoyed this film, I have a lot to say about it, so let me go ahead and start with the good. The title sequence was very clever, just like part 5. I do appreciate little innovations like that. It had a better story. At least it had an attempt to have a story in place of the film. In other words, we understand there are these inbred hillbillies that are out there killing people for whatever reason, but here we get some history and some background on what's going on and why this Danny character is so important to the family.
I should have known. I should have known you were going to screw our group average on Wrong Turn 6 just because there's a whole bunch of porn shit in it. You're a disgusting animal.
Why did my voice crack? As far as the cons, I don't like old people being killed. I've already said before that I don't like babies being killed. I don't like old people being killed. And right away, the first kill of this movie is an old woman. So it's more or less setting the tone that, hey, this film's not gonna have any rules whatsoever. Probably my favorite kill in the entire franchise is a suffocation/orgasm scene. And the other kill that I was laughing my ass off and was completely uncalled for was the fire hose enema. That's just fucked up. Coming in at 26 is Wrong Turn 3, and let's just talk about it. It's bad. Let's just talk about it. I'll be as nice as I possibly can. And I got a lot of negatives, so let's go ahead and get started. When prisoners are transferred and their bus crashes in the West Virginia forest, a group of convicts and one of the correction officers meet a raffer who is on the run from cannibalistic hillbillies who have murdered her friends. Now, when you look at all the Wrong Turn movies, right, usually there's a group of people, young adults, that you have some sympathy for. You kind of care about them if it's written well, and you don't want them to die, but they are, so the deaths are a little bit more tough to sit through. In this particular case, you have a group of prisoners who you don't give a shit about. Some of them are racist, and it's more or less free willy. You can go ahead and have fun and just have at them. You're looking forward to the kills and the creativity that they're going to go ahead and do these guys in because they have their comeuppance. And yes, some of them are innovative, but it's ruined with digital effects. Now, if you've been following me for a while, I think most of us horror fans would tend to agree that digital effects are okay when used at a very minimalistic level, and we all love practical effects. That's the way to go, and some of the original Wrong Turn movies do have that. Here, as innovative as the kills are, the digital effects just takes you out of the realm of the film's reality, and you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty fake, and they're done pretty bad, on the cheap. And as far as unique deaths, we get an arrow through a boob, which is pretty unique. And what I find funny in these films, I can tell these films are written for the 15-year-old guy who's watching this, who shouldn't be watching it, is because anytime one of the male protagonists is holding boobs in these movies, it's like it's the first time he's seen a pair. He's like, oh my God, look at these boobs. Oh God. It was very cool to see it like an attempt in continuity when they arrive at the burnt down watchtower, which takes place in part 1. I'm like, oh, okay, they're establishing that these movies are connected. They haven't done that really. So I really did get a nice smile out of that. Some of the green screens were completely horrible. I believe at the end, I think the guy's name is Three Fingers, the one hillbilly that's kind of notorious. And I guess the most well-known out of all the hillbillies in these movies, where he's on back of that tow truck and he has that one last battle sequence at the end. You can tell it was done on the cheap, and it was, I guess, kind of fun for what it was worth. But these films are bad. I can't lie to you. I'm being very nice when it comes to this shit. These are tough to sit through, and this is one of the worst ones. And there was one moment in the film where I actually got excited. It was that one moment where the convict was just tired of running, and he just wanted to stand and go mano a mano with Three Fingers. It was kind of like, I love those moments in movies, especially in horror films, because again, they're tired of running. It's kind of like when Billy stood up to the Predator. Billy! Or when that one guy stood up to Jason and Jason Takes Manhattan. I think all of us as an audience all can agree that we all have that same feeling. Like, hey, if I was in that position, I'd be tired of running as well, and I would want to go ahead and fight and go out my way. I wish more writers did that, but maybe had the fight more evenly balanced, because in this particular film, the head cartel guy, the Mexican guy, it's one-sided. He gets his ass beat and taken out pretty fast by Three Fingers. Because I think they have established in part 2 that they have some like rejuvenating powers, like Wolverine. They can get hurt, they can get killed, they can come back. They kind of let go of that concept after this particular one, I think. But in this film, I think it still stands. Anyway, he gets his ass kicked and the fight's over before it started. And it's shot horribly, and like those Taken movies. So yeah, I didn't like this film. And it was actually this film and part 2 that set up that whole narrative that this whole place was contaminated, Hence, the inbreds and hillbillies couldn't eat the game that was out there because they were contaminated. They ended up going to cannibalism. That's why they're killing these people. So again, they kind of forget about that as the sequels move on. But there you go. That's my 26. Jesus, these films are horrible. Coming in at 25 is Hellseeker. Now, of all the Hellraiser movies that I just saw, this one is probably the biggest disappointment, only because we finally got Ashley Lawrence back, Kirsty, in the film, and she is not utilized whatsoever. It's a wasted opportunity on what could have happened. And I don't know the backstory of why she didn't want to be in the film. Maybe they didn't want to pay her since it was a straight to video release. But having her in a film is what fans have been wanting for, I don't know, for years. We finally get her, and she's only utilized in 20 minutes of the film, which again, wasted opportunity. So that's a big turnoff on my end. So losing a lot of points there. The film also lost a lot of points with the originality of the film. It was more or less the same as Hellraiser Inferno. You have somebody who's really not the greatest person in the world facing their sins and slowly descending into madness with just a series of just jump scares and also dream sequences. The digital effects are distracting and old, and the plot is really forgettable. I had to look at my notes this entire time to kind of recall what I saw. And again, that's why it's at 25. Wasted opportunity. Coming in at 24 is Jigsaw. This is the first Saw movie that I've mentioned so far in this 31 countdown. And Jigsaw is actually, in my opinion, the worst of the franchise. I had never seen it before, but I know that it was more or less made not too long ago. And it was more or less about 7 years since the last Saw film had come out. So I don't know. I was kind of expecting maybe a reinvention of the film, maybe some new takes to it, a new vision to the whole Saw franchise. Because again, Saw... Again, this is the first time I'm speaking about it, so kind of hear me out. The first two, I enjoyed. The rest of them, it started to become just like this brainless type of pattern. You have more or less 5 people who are captured at the very beginning. They figure out who they are, how they got there. Before you know it, they find out they all have a common trait amongst one another. There's a series of traps. There's a detective investigation going on. And then at the very end, this twist that you didn't see coming, but it's all explained to you in a series of flashbacks. So that's more or less Saw 3 through 8. And I was expecting something different with Jigsaw, and that's not what I got. More or less, I just saw this as a weak cash grab. Again, they didn't really spend a lot of money on the sets or the cast. The effects were completely horrible, and when digital, in my opinion, Saw really excels when the practical effects kind of like reign king, like the previous films. Once they introduce digital, it kind of takes away from the reality of the film and the kills. So there's that. And it's a shame because at the time, Tobin Bell, he's always great in what he does. And I'm glad they kind of brought him back for Saw X. And I'll talk about that later. But anytime he's in the film excels. And here it just feels like a wasted opportunity to use him and his character in his presence. That is why Jigsaw is the worst of the franchise, in my opinion, at 24. Coming in at 23 is Saw number 6. That's 6 in Spanish. Now, in this particular one, you have an insurance agent, more or less, who conducts audits and more or less refuses people to get the care they need in life-saving surgeries or procedures. He's more or less going for profits for his company at the sacrifice and expense of people's lives. So it's more or less like a Breaking Bad plot, but in the Jigsaw world, which I like. That's pretty cool. You want him to die. You want everybody in his team to die. So you're looking forward to the deaths. And some of the deaths were very creative when it had him making choices amongst who in his team is going to survive. There's one particular scene that I love where the insurance agent has to make a choice on who's going to live in this particular game. He has a secretary who's got a family and children. And then he's got somebody who doesn't have a family. They're very young. And he's contemplating, who do I pick? So it's more or less a Jigsaw environment type of choice he has to make that is very similar to what he has to make in the real world, if that makes sense. And again, I got to be 100% honest with everybody. I am not a fan of Mark Hoffman ever since he took over as Jigsaw. So in my opinion, the film's more or less tanked when he was the head Jigsaw because the traps didn't make any sense. There was no psychological consequence. Usually with Tobin Bell, the original Jigsaw has a trap. He gives you a choice and you survive by making a choice by doing something horrible to your body. You're scarred by the experience, but you get to live. With Mark Hoffman's trap, it's like, you're dead if you do this and you're deader if you do that. Choose. It's like, what the fuck? There's no choice. I'm dead either way. So I don't like the films with him in it. I hate his lips. And every time they're close to busting him with evidence, I can't wait because I want to see him get caught, but he ends up just getting out of it. And it just aggravates me. So again, that's my opinion on Mark Hoffman, and that's my opinion on Saw 6. It was okay. What number am I on? Coming in at 22 is Saw 3D, the final chapter. Bullshit. And what can I say about this? It's same shit. It's all the same shit. They were made every year, released in October for the cheap, and they made money. They invested a couple million and they made 50 million. It's the same shit, but this time it's in 3D. That being said, this film does have my favorite trap sequence kill, where you have the late great singer from Linkin Park, Chester Bennington, I believe is his name. He's in a car, you have someone underneath the car, then you have somebody tied to the car, and then when it fails, is just a bunch of fun. I can tell more thought and planning was made around that trap than the entire movie. Practical effects, it looked really cool. I loved it. And I do love the beginning where you have this one huge compartment that's put in the middle of downtown city, whatever they're at. You have two guys that have been fucking this one girl. She's been playing them both. So you have these two simps like battling who's going to kill who for her. And they make the greatest choice in the world. I love the choice they made by killing that bitch. But it has you think, okay, as innovative and as visually amazing as that whole sequence is, from the practicality standpoint, if you think about it, how the hell did he build that trap, that entire case, that whole platform, and put it in the downtown city of Chicago, wherever, without anybody asking questions? But you just got to turn off your brain and enjoy this show. That's all. This, in fact, was not the final chapter. This was just a pause on the franchise until Jigsaw showed up 7 years later. I didn't see this in the theater, so I don't know if the 3D paid off for the audiences. I'm sure they kind of did, but as far as the home audience, again, aside from the trap sequence and the vehicles that I mentioned already, it was forgettable. I don't remember anything else after that because it's the same shit. They all kind of blend together in your brain. Oh, God. How many more of this shit? That's all I got to say about Saw 3D. And coming in at 21 is Wrong Turn 4. You know what? Now that I think about it, I think I had more fun with the Wrong Turn films than any of the other films, because the Hellraiser series and the Saw franchise, after the initial first 2 or 3, were just dog shit. But the Wrong Turn movies were just schlock. They know what they are, and they're not ashamed of it. And I actually had more of a good time watching these films than the others. That's just an observation I want to share. But Part 4 is the biggest departure of the Wrong Turn franchise because it doesn't take place in the West Virginia woodlands. It takes place in a sanitarium. I'm not sure if the people in the sanitarium are just inbreds or family of the inbreds that we know and love. So the inbreds take over this particular asylum, and then we have a group of young adults who are on a ski trip in West Virginia, get caught in a storm, and they go ahead and break into this asylum, which, if you think about it, every more or less horror film begins with a group of people breaking into somebody's property or home. Wrong Turn, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Remake, Wrong Turn 2, Phantasm. Need I go on? You know what I'm saying. But it's a Wrong Turn movie, so you're going to get the same old stuff. You're going to get the kills, you're going to get the boobs, you're going to get the sex scenes and more kills and blood, and you're going to get a few people who you think are going to get away scot-free, and then boom, they pull the rug out from your feet, and it's like, that's right. No one gets out alive in these movies. Which this movie had me, because at the very end of the movie, when they're on the snowmobile, I thought these two girls were actually going to get away, but of course not. So they are what they are. It's a guilty pleasure. So that's why I have Wrong Turn, number 4, Bloody Beginnings at 21. Before I get to 20, I'm going to take a quick break. Messing with this puzzle. I've been having a whole bunch of dreams lately, nightmares. So just give me a second here. Just give me a second.
My mom had me young.
My mom had me young.
All right, let's get back at it. Coming in at number 20, we have 20 is Wrong Turn 2. And you know what? I fucking love this one. Why? 2 words, Henry fucking Rollins. That's 3. You know what I mean? I knew he was going to kick ass, and if he was going to die, he was going to go out in a cool fucking way, and he did. So just for him being in this film, it went from 30 to 20. I loved it that much. But that's not only it. I did love that this was like a time capsule of the time that it came out. I believe it came out in 2005 or 2006, where Survivor and all these game shows, reality game shows, are starting to become very popular. And this kind of took a piece of that with that show that Henry Rollins was hosting. And by the way, he did a great job as a host in that movie. If that was a real game, I would want to check out that game. I love the twist of fate idea. I love that they have radiated tags, that they had to go and neutralize at this one spot to get a dare. It was really inventive. I think more thought went into that game show than the movie, but I loved it. And of course, it's a wrong turn movie, so you're gonna get the boobs, you're gonna get sex, and you're gonna get the kills. And I did love this particular sequence. It's actually my second favorite sequence out of all the movies, is where you have a woman who's naked by the water, and you have an inbred guy jerking off watching him. Then his inbred wife comes and sees him, gets pissed, and instead of getting pissed at him, he goes down, kills the woman, skins her face, puts her face on her face, and lets him fuck her. That's pretty cool. That's true love. This was better than the original. I mean, it's still technically a low budget bad movie, but I enjoyed myself watching it. So that's why Wrong Turn 2 is at 20. Henry fucking Rollins. Coming in at 19 is Saw 4. Now, Saw 4, I have to be completely honest. When it comes to Saw 4 and 5, I really don't remember much of the films. There's a few things that stood out to me, but this is the Hoffman side of the Jigsaw story, which I've already said I'm not a fan of because his traps don't make any sense. You're dead either way, so it takes a lot of the emotional tension and weight away from the scene. But this particular one, I will bow down. Bow down. How's that song go? Bow down. I can't say the words. Anyway, bow down. Yes, all the Saw films are cash grabs, and yes, they're made on the cheap because they're going to make a huge return on the Halloween season. And the story may suck, the acting may suck, the production may suck, but they always vest all the money in the practical kills. This is right before digital, and this particular one, Saw 4, opens up with a very realistic autopsy, which is kind of gruesome to watch. I mean, you're watching it, it's like, ugh, it looks real. It looks really good. You also get a little bit of the backstory. You actually feel some sympathy and empathy for Tobin Bell, Jigsaw. You find out how he met his wife. You found out that they had a child on the way. He had planned it perfectly, and they lost it tragically. So again, there's not many villains. I wouldn't even call him a movie villain, but there's not many movie villains that I would sympathize and empathize with. Like, hey, I would probably do the same thing. But that's what makes Jigsaw a very unique character, and I'm glad they did him justice in Saw X. And again, we'll talk about that later. But again, Saw 4 was really not memorable to me aside from a few pieces here and there, so that's why it's at number 19. Coming in at 18 is Saw 5, and honestly, fuck this movie, fuck Hoffman, fuck those series of movies, because again, the traps don't make any sense. Some people are just dead either way if they pass the test or not, and it's just annoying. So that's all I gotta say. Fuck Saw 5. Even at the end, the coffin trap, that whole thing, I mean, fuck you. Fuck Saw 5. Coming in at 17 is Hellraiser Hellworld, and you know what? I actually really enjoyed this film. I was really frustrated with the mid part of the movie because they had utilized Pinhead as like a slasher. Like, I mean, he doesn't use a meat cleaver. What's going on here? So I thought the film was poorly done at that part, but until the end where everything kind of came into one and I understood what was going on, that's when I kind of fell in love with it. And anytime you have a young Henry Cavill getting a blowjob at a party and you have Lance Hendrickson, who is the man, I've met him before. I talked about that story in my Pumpkinhead review. You can check it out there. This movie, as the other Hellraisers post part 3, right? And just like the other films, it feels like the Hellraiser IP was slapped on a script that was sitting on the shelf and they couldn't sell. But you know what? If that movie had been sold, I still would have seen it. I think it was a great revenge story, and I love the twist at the very end where you find out they've been buried for quite some time and they were on the verge of dying and all the friends were more or less suffocating next to them. That's pretty gruesome if you think about it. And what I also love about the movie is because, honestly, 2005, I remember just like it was the other day, I remember the internet was a new thing. Everyone was going online trying to figure out, what community to be involved in, what games to play online. So I like that they brought the Hellraiser world in a video game online. Again, very 2005s. The music's very post-Matrix, and it just feels kind of like a nostalgic trip for me to watch this movie. So I enjoyed it in many different ways that I was not expecting. So that's Hellraiser Hellworld. Number 16 is Hostel 2. Now, I want to be clear, torture porn is not for me. I saw this movie once and I saw half of it again to kind of refresh my memory for this review. And there is a scene, the bloodbath scene with the scythe, and I couldn't see the rest of the movie. There's just a point where I have a threshold for just grotesque brutality, and the acting by, I believe the actress name is Heather, I forget her last name, but she plays Lorna. And her acting in that particular scene is just so real. The sound design of the scythe going across her back and the reaction of her being cut was just too much for me. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just getting maybe weak in my old age and maybe sympathetic to just seeing that on screen, but it's shot pretty well. It's done well. I mean, it's very convincing, but it's just a huge turnoff for me. Like I said, I'll go to a point. I mean, the wrong turn movies, those are silly, those are fun, but the acting isn't all that great when things go down. This one, it just felt a little too real, but that's all I'm saying on that part. So I couldn't finish it seeing the second time around, but I do love how the movie kind of picks up where part one left off, where we get a kind of a conclusion with Paxton's story. In other words, you can't escape these guys. I do like that kind of closure to that piece, but the film in itself is kind of boring, to be honest. Outside of the deaths and the torture scenes, it's okay. Part one had more, I guess at the time it was new because torture porn was a new thing and it had more of a memorable experience. But part two for me is just, it's if you're into that, hey, I applaud you, go do your thing. But for me, I saw it once many years ago and I saw half of it a couple weeks back and I couldn't do it. I'm getting old, but it was okay. That's why it's at number 16. Number 15 is Hellraiser Bloodline. And you know what? This was actually better than I thought. I had never seen it. Like I said, I stopped at part 3. And I actually like the history of finding out where the box was made. How it ended up in my hands, I don't know, but I'm still tinkering with the thing, so we'll see. But I did appreciate the history on where this came from and who made it, and the bloodline and their responsibility and what they needed to do in space. It was pretty cool to see a young Adam Scott, and again, just to get more background on the history of Hellraiser 4. And I do love how it does continue with, at the end of part 3, where the building, I believe that one woman puts the box in concrete and the building now has all these configurations of the box. I like how it actually kind of talks about that building and who made it. I feel like it could have been a better movie if they just focused on the non-space ridiculousness and just focused on the history in the present time. And maybe if it had more money, it would have been more of a success in the Hellraiser franchise. But in that of itself, it does make sense why it went direct to video. It's a perfect movie for that type of genre and release. And it was good, better than what I thought. It's not a great film, but I'm not going to revisit it anytime soon, but it was better than what I thought. And that's Hellraiser Bloodline. Coming in at 14 is Saw Part 3, and I love this one. Again, anything with Tobin Bell when he's the original Jigsaw, there's just more emotional weight with the traps, and I actually enjoyed this. I love the whole situation. Anytime him and Amanda are on screen, I smile. I think there's a great chemistry between them both, and again, I'm glad that's why they did Saw X, and I can't wait to talk to you about that later on. But I do love what's going on here. He's in insufferable pain. They get the doctor more or less saying, if he dies, you die. I like that whole pressure dynamic. I do like the traps as well. The woman naked freezing in that one room is pretty hardcore. The judge being just dumped with all these pigs. And I'm thinking, how many pigs did Jigsaw load? I can just imagine him and Amanda just having a conversation. How many pigs should we have? I don't know. How many do you think he'll untie him right away, or he'll just scream in place for about 5 minutes before he actually has to rescue him? I think a baker's dozen would work. No, I think 25 pigs should be all right. 25 pigs? Where am I going to get that? I don't know. Check the local farms. But Saw 3 is great. I do love the whole scene where the doctor's operating on Jigsaw right there in this warehouse. They're using just common tools covered in rust, and the whole brain surgery with removing the skull piece is pretty gruesome. Again, it's a fake movie. We all know it's fake, but here I am doing this while watching it. I mean, it's done that well. And again, Tobin Bell, I love the dude, and I hope to see more Saw films maybe later in the future. But again, anytime he's in the film, it's just a great experience. But yeah, like I said, that's kind of the frustrating thing about most of these Saw films is that whoever's going through the test and they have to make a decision, like this one guy, I think his name is Jeff in part 3. Every time he's given a choice of what he needs to do, I understand all these people are tied in some way, form, or fashion with his son's death, but just sitting there, you got 60 seconds, and he sits there crying and just kind of, I don't know what to do for 30 seconds. It gets kind of frustrating. So I get it, it's a movie, they have to do that, but it's just, okay, it's getting repetitive. Let's do something else. But that being said, I love Saw 3. It was great. Coming in at Lucky 13 is Wrong Turn, the original, the one that started it all back in 2003. And believe it or not, it is the most boring and tame out of all the others. Yes, you have hints of, premarital sex and some kills that are kind of gory, but not over the top like the fire hose enema. But it's the one that started it all. And again, you wonder, because the budget was $13 million, and you wonder where that money went, because maybe to the star's payroll at the time, but it's kind of a slow experience. But again, it's the beginnings of what it didn't know what it had. But again, just a typical movie trope. So you have young adults who are all attractive, who get into some sort of car trouble in the middle of nowhere, and they stumble along somebody's home, and they decide to walk in like they own the fucking place and use a restroom. Don't do that. Just don't. If you do, you're asking for it, and I have no sympathy for you. And it's also one of the few wrong turns where people actually live at the end, and there's a quote-unquote happy ending. So I think that only lasted for part 1 and 2. After that, fuck it. They didn't give a shit. But yeah, I really didn't enjoy it that much. There wasn't enough boobs and sex. Okay, coming in at number 12 is Hostel. Now, Hostel, like I said, I'm not a big fan of torture porn, but this is the first and one of the most successful torture porn movies that came out. Maybe some would say it kicked off the torture porn genre, but again, I'm not a big fan of it, but let's go ahead and talk about it. You got 3 young men going out overseas and just looking to get laid. That seems to be the trope for a lot of these movies. They're looking to get laid. They meet a young Manu Ginobili who tells them about this one place that's off the grid, it's off the apps. But man, the best girls you have to go there. So again, words to the wise, if you're gonna be traveling anywhere overseas or even in the States, don't take any roads that are off the freeway, shortcuts, or places that locals recommend. Just stay in a very public place. But this film is pretty nauseating in my opinion. The one kill that really gets to me all the time, it wouldn't be a kill, it's just the process of hurting somebody, is the Achilles heel cut. That just seems to hurt. And again, they don't really show much, but it's enough to where you understand with the sound design, the pain that's being inflicted. And of course, great performances all around. But again, not a big fan, but it's the best of the 3. That's why I have it at number 12. Coming in at number 11 is Hellraiser 3. Now, believe it or not, I did see this in the theaters, and it was one of the first times I remember seeing a Hellraiser film in the theaters. The previous 2, I was too little, so I saw that on VHS or HBO. But I remember the theater being not what I expected. In other words, I remember people laughing a little too much in the film than I was expecting, if that makes any sense. There's a lot more jokes and there's a lot more tongue-in-cheek humor, especially with Pinhead when that one guy mentions like, Jesus, he was not quite. The theater laughed. And I remember the one scene that actually had people get up and leave was when Pinhead more or less surfaces from that statue and he's got that club more or less at his disposal and he starts just killing people left and right. And the one scene where the doors close and you see blood pouring out from underneath the door and the chains just kind of slicing through flesh. People got up and left because it was grotesque. And I remember that image stuck with me as a kid. We all have those images in horror films as a kid where you just, oh my God, your imagination's just going crazy of what's going on behind that door. My mind was just running amok on the brutality that was going on. So I remember that scene haunting me for quite some years. But then again, you see it as an adult and it's just very kind of silly with the new Cenobites. There's one guy who's got a camera in his face.
Have you seen what he did to me, you little bitch?
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
It's like, come on, seriously? And you got that one DJ who's shooting CDs out, which again, CDs, for those who don't know, at the time were a very new thing. There was also this other movie that used CDs as weapons. It's called I Come in Peace. It starred Dolph Lundgren. Check it out if you want. But again, CDs were just this new aesthetic. It was new. It looked cool on screen. So it was used quite often. And I think that's why they used it in this particular Hellraiser. But again, a decent movie, characters I cared about, kind of silly, but again, that's why I have it at number 11. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the top 10. And if you haven't done so already, If you like what you've seen, you've been entertained, please go ahead and click the subscribe button, hit the like button, put some comments down below. Let me know what your rankings are, what you think, if any particular segment in this whole video stood out to you. A lot of effort went into this, so I would appreciate this. And plus, you know, this whole thing right here, don't mess with this before you do a review, because again, I'm just getting these weird headaches periodically and these weird visions. I think I'm seeing something behind my back, and I don't know. It's just odd. So just don't mess with this. Now coming in at number 10 is Hellraiser 2. This particular one, I have a little attachment to it because I actually got to interview Barbie Wilde. She was the female Cenobite in the Hellraiser film. I got to talk to her, and she gave me a lot of insight on the film, and I'll go into that in a bit. But real quick, my thoughts. This film came out in '88, around the same time Dream Warriors came out, so there's a lot of similarities in those two films, where you have the protagonist and the second female protagonist more or less in a state mental hospital. So I remember as a kid being confused between the two films, and I appreciate the doctor in this particular film who's running the ward. He's more or less infatuated with the Cenobite world and that whole mythology. He's also into S&M, and I like how that entire narrative is placed within the film. It's not exposed for everybody to see, but it's there just like part one was. The physical effects and practical effects are amazing. But when I was interviewing Barbie Wilde about the film, she said this film is notorious because it ran out of money halfway through the film. The entire second half of this movie was supposed to take place in this dimensional hell world with incredible effects. It was supposed to be pretty breathtaking for its time and very ambitious, but again, the film ran out of money. That's why we have these horrible effects at the end where the doctor became this stop motion puppet, which again, for the time, you know, people will say, well, I bet back then it would look really cool, but no, back then it looked horrible, just as it does today, so it didn't age well. And you can even see like more or less the half of the actual puppet running after Kirsty and down that hallway. You can see that it's not complete. So again, the design, the effects all ran out of money. That's why the effects look so bad, according to her. And she also mentioned she was on set for maybe about a week or two. That's really it. She didn't get to meet the entire cast. She was more or less shot in single frames, maybe with Pinhead 1 or 2 times, but that's really it. And her experience is really not all that embracing, in her words. And I do have a hope here because the Hellraiser remake, I really did enjoy. I loved it. And I'm hoping the success of that film will translate into a sequel, and we actually get to see this Hellraiser world the way we were supposed to. And we'll see what happens, but that's my number 10. Coming in at number 9, believe it or not, is Spiral. I enjoyed this. Again, as I mentioned early on in the video, that I didn't care about the Saw franchise after part 3. They were just cash grabs. They came out every year. So again, I never saw a lot of them until just recently. So when I saw Spiral, I'm like, oh, Chris Rock. Oh, Samuel Jackson. Okay, let me give this a shot. And I loved it. It was good. This is a great example of what happens when another filmmaker, another crew, another staff gets in charge of an IP and does something a little different, but honors the original franchise. Because right before this film, I had seen Jigsaw, and I was totally just, whatever, this is just trash, blah, blah, blah. I saw this, and the first trap with that detective where he has to cut off his tongue or he'll die, I'm like, oh, the traps are making sense now. There's actually a consequence. Again, you leave scarred, but you have to do something horrible to your body, but you have a chance to live. This is what Jigsaw, this is what Saw is all about. So I was glad to see that take place in this film. Chris Rock, I've never really taken him seriously as an actor, but here he more or less, he does a great job as a detective. I enjoyed the New Jack City pun. This looks like some New Jack City shit. And I love the fact that the Jigsaw in this movie more or less understood what the Jigsaw of the past was trying to do, and he's doing the same here, but in his life, and he's more or less helping somebody who helped him in it when he was younger. Not to give anything away, but again, I love the film. I like how it left it open-ended, and I hope this continues with maybe a sequel. I don't know, but again, I love that, and I really hope other IPs allow that freedom and that liberty to say, hey, you know, we're going to branch off. We're going to call this the Book of Hellraiser, the Book of Massacre. I don't know. And just try something different with a different crew and a different imagination, a different take on it. And I think that just opens up a whole new world of possibilities. And I enjoyed Spiral a lot. So that's my number 9. Coming in at number 8 is Saw 2. I saw this in the theater, and I guess there's something about having that theater experience with some of these films that is more of a lasting type of feel or impact on you. But this one, I remember walking away from Saw 2 and thinking, okay, this makes sense to me. I like where this is going because everybody likes rules. Everybody likes to understand the mythology of any character or any movie they're watching. Once you understand the rules, you feel vested and you feel you can understand what's going on in the movie, and you more or less you respect it. And this one, I walked away thinking, okay, if you listen to Jigsaw, if you follow his rules, you have a chance to survive. And that's unfortunately not what Mark Wahlberg's brother did. Donnie Wahlberg, he didn't do that. And I do love the fact that Donnie Wahlberg is a detective in this film, and Jigsaw places his son amongst some of the criminals he's put in jail, and not really being the best cop at it, maybe falsifying evidence and just maybe making up shit on the report to imprison these people. And that's a great narrative. And as a parent, you're like, holy shit, I can't believe he did that. But again, I love how that's just all the consequences of the choices this particular person made, which is what Jigsaw is all about. He wants to teach you a lesson. You see, it makes sense. It makes sense when you go with the logic and the mythology that Jigsaw is trying to go with. It's all about lessons and valuing life. And when you get away from that, it's shit. And in my opinion, Saw 2 has some of the most painful traps of the entire franchise, because when Amanda's thrown into that pit of needles, I remember the entire theater just making oohs and ahs, like, oh, and just couldn't look, because you can only imagine the pain that she's going through trying to sort through that needle in a haystack to find the key. And then she started scooping them out. Oh, God. That was pretty memorable, in my opinion. But it's also the introduction of Amanda, and you find out that she's actually helping him because of her experience with him. It's kind of changed her life, opened her eyes to a whole new perspective, and now she's vested in helping him out. There's that. And I do love these endings that are kind of open-ended, because part 1 ended with game over, and he slams the door, and it's kind of leaves the audience like, what's going to happen? You hear him crying as the credits are rolling. Here, it kind of did the same thing, and I love those types of endings because not all endings are supposed to be happy. And I eventually find out what happened to him. But again, Saw 2 was a very fun movie-going experience. I enjoyed that experience going to see it, and that's why I have it at number 8. Coming in at number 7 is Hellraiser Inferno. I fucking love this movie. I love the fact that, again, by this point, we understood the Cenobite world. We understood what Pinhead was, and more or less the rules, the consequences of what happens if you fuck with this box. This one. But now we're introducing, there's a hierarchy, there's roles within this world, the auditor, the assessor, and the surgeon. I was like, oh my God, I love this process. And I was looking forward to seeing more sequels with this new world, because I found it incredibly interesting. I love details. And when I see directors and filmmakers making efforts in the smallest things we may not notice, I appreciate that. The fact that the auditor was using an old typewriter, the paper was worn, there was a ribbon. I love that detail. The character designs, for example, my favorite was the surgeon. You walk in, you think it's this huge beast. He turns around, the surgeon's actually attached to his back. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. The fact that they had women licking him or licking somebody to clean him before the surgery takes place. Now, that being said, there's not many times in movies where I go, hardly anything does that to me. But there was a sequence where these women were licking him and spitting their spit into a cup and then making him drink it. Yes, maybe there's another element from a type of genre that they're trying to imply in this, because again, the S&M variable is there in the original Hellraiser films, and maybe they're trying to bring that sexuality and vulgarness back. I don't know. I know there's an audience for that, but not this guy, but it just made me gag. And now it's not many films have done that. Ugh. There were surprises in the film, like finding a dog tied into a woman's body. I'm like, okay, that's something I didn't expect, but bravo. And you can see it really draws inspiration from 7 and The Exorcist 3, which are some of my favorite films. And the recasting of Pinhead actually works in this film. Unlike the previous film, Revelations, this Pinhead was doable. He wasn't the Doug Bradley, but I think if any other person takes the attributes of what Doug Bradley has done, they'll succeed. And in this particular case, I was really impressed with this Pinhead. It was pretty odd to see Heather Langenkamp show up as the landlord, and she only had, 2 scenes that she probably completed within 1 day of shooting. So, hey, there's Heather Langenkamp, but there she goes, and that's it. And one more thing I forgot to mention is that I love the fact that God and angels are actually introduced into this world, and there's actually dialogue between the two worlds that are coexisting in this type of symbiont relationship. They need each other to do the work of the other, which is very original. And again, it kind of reminded me of Supernatural, the show, which I loved. I haven't seen every season, but I do love how there's so many elements in the worlds from heaven and hell that intertwine. And again, I wish, you know what, my hope is that they ever make this into a show using this world and these rules. I doubt that's going to happen. But again, bravo to the originality, the effort to make something original with a small budget. And that's why I have Hellraiser Judgment at number 7. Coming in at number 6 is Hellraiser Inferno. I love this film so much that I actually did a review on it, which is very unlike me. It takes a lot for me to do a review. I have to be really in love with it to sit down, take the time to record it. And I actually did that a couple weeks back. So if you want to check that out, it's right there. But again, Hellraiser Inferno really took me by surprise because, again, of the psychological aspect of it. Yes, it's a low budget movie. Yes, you're not going to get the best acting, the best sets, but the message, the core message of what it was trying to communicate was present. People like this particular detective aren't the best people. These guys cheat on his wife. He's got a kid. More or less, he's not the best detective. He plants evidence. He steals evidence. And all those actions, again, like every other one of these films, there's consequences to it. And again, I love psychological horror. And I love the fact that this entire movie, he heard a young boy crying for help. And he was just ambitious and he wanted to save this particular life. And in the end, you find out it's his inner child. And more or less, that end sequence of Pinhead has him as an adult and him as a child, and his adult self is killing his innocence. And Pinhead says that one line like, "Your actions are killing your innocence." And like, oh my God, it stayed with me. And the acting on that particular scene was incredible. It landed to where it needed to be. And what's also unique about Hellraiser Inferno is that this particular one was the first time I walked away with, oh, there are consequences to your actions that are felt on an emotional level. The others, yes, there's consequences, but there's more or less like, ooh, that's gross. I can't believe that's going to happen to him. Oh, they're tearing them apart. You think of a physical pain aspect, but this is the first one that kind of hones in torturing your soul. And that's what landed with me as a viewer. And that is why I have Hellraiser Inferno at number 6. Now let's go to the top 5. Coming in at number 5 is Wrong Turn, the remake that recently came out. I was blown away on how well this was made and how much of a mature angle was taken when you look at the other films, which are just schlock booby fests. This was a movie that was taken seriously, as if like Zack Snyder went into the comic book genre and made a great film like Zack Snyder's Justice League, which is the greatest comic book film of all time. But the tone and the respect that was taken with this film really shook me. It's like everybody came to their senses like, well, maybe calling inbred hillbillies is a little wrong and maybe a tad racist. So maybe we should take that element away and just call them mountain people and have them educated with a hierarchy, court laws, and they don't look deformed. They don't look like inbred hillbillies. These are just people who've chosen to live amongst themselves alone in the woods. And the tone of that was wonderful. It was a refreshing take after sitting through Booby Fest and blood and just silliness for, oh my God, how many films? 8, 9? I don't care. But this was a breath of fresh air and I love everything about it. And of course, you have the addition of Matthew Modine, which is going to bring a lot of legitimacy to the role. Of course, his time is valuable. You know, he's not going to waste it on just doing anything. And the fact that he was there and there was a lot of respect paid to the people who live, you know, in the lower parts of the city. And then you have the people who live in the mountains. There's just a lot of care and detail that took place in this film. Yes, the kills are still graphic, but you understand why they were done. And decisions are made within this film that don't make sense, but in the end they play out. And again, this has one of the best twist endings. There's 2 twists, I believe, at the end of this film, which I love, which happened during the credits. So again, stay for the full credits, but I love how it ended. And again, bravo to the filmmaking. I loved it as a father. I would do the same thing for my daughter going out trying to find her. But again, best of the damn franchise. That's why I have Wrong Turn Remake, number 5. Coming in at number 4 is the one that started it all. The original is Saw Part 1. Now, again, I didn't see this in the theaters, but I did see it at home. And my God, the impact this film made at the time was a breath of fresh air into the horror community because at the time, I think horror was at a low point. We had the Know What You Did Last Summer, the urban legend films, the slashers like Scream, which were more or less tame but entertaining in their own right, yes. But Saw brought some brutality. into the genre, which was much needed. We had an interesting character in Jigsaw who didn't necessarily kill people. He more or less puts you in a situation where he said, hey, you got a choice. You can cut out your eyeball and get a key that's lodged behind your brain, or you can die. It's your choice. And again, and I love when choices are given to the audience like that, because now it puts you in the character seat. What would you do? Everybody in the theater is thinking the same thing. What I do, I have the balls to cut my eye out and get that key. Do I have the balls to go ahead and crawl through just a tunnel of razor wire before I get burned up? I love choices. Choices are wonderful, and I love that this film gave us those. And now you have a monster who's not necessarily killing people brutally. He's getting people who more or less aren't taking advantage of the wonderful life they've been given, because he has cancer, he's dying. He understands that life is short and you should love life for everything it gives you, good or bad. And that's a beautiful thing in a way. I would go about it a different way, but I love that he says he's a counselor in the Saw X. But I love the fact that the moral lesson of this entire film, the code of it, the theme is life is precious, enjoy it, don't take advantage of it. That's a wonderful thing. And it's a new thing. It's a new injection of a theme in horror that hasn't really been placed in what we've all grown up with, right? So again, Saw, I respect the fuck out of it. I respect what it did for the horror genre. I respect that it brought a new element that's intriguing, and it would have a dialogue. You can have a dialogue about the consequences and the morale of this. It's a wonderful thing. And again, Saw, again, I loved it. That's why I have it at number 4. Coming in at number 3 is Hellraiser, the one that started it all, the one that introduced the box and the question, what is your pleasure, into the horror genre. Now, the one thing that makes Hellraiser stand out again above all is the reanimation sequence of Frank as he comes out of the woodwork just because of spilt blood. And if you think about it, when you look at all the CGI, all the technology that's come into play, I'd say arguably that sequence is just as good, if on the same level of The Thing when it comes to practical effects. Practical effects are so timeless, and I think if it wasn't for that type of effort made into the effects, we wouldn't be talking about the film to this day, because again, it's very memorable. And if you've seen it once as a kid, you remember that particular scene, especially when Frank yells when he's finally completed reanimation, so to speak. But the overall concepts that this film introduces is something relatively new, because think about it, in the 80s you had slasher films which were more or less just killing people for cannon fodder, just more or less we wanted each death to be as more entertaining than the last. Here you had people asking for these Cenobites to arrive because they were curious about the pleasures they could experience in the world that they didn't know about. So curiosity and those pleasures are what had people drawn to the box. And I love that concept. It's something new because, again, whatever happens, you more or less ask for it. And if you think about it, when you think of the 80s more or less, you think slashers, you think of the icons that we all know and love, right? But all of them more or less are using the same template. But here you have a non-slasher horror film that has stood the test of time. And we're still talking about it to this day. How many non-slasher horror films can you honestly think of right now off the top of your head that aren't The Thing or Hellraiser? And this really isn't mentioned much, but this film came out at the height of the satanic panic movement that I mentioned in my Trick or Treat review, where parents are more or less morally concerned about what their kids were watching and listening to that was related to anything demonic or the devil. And again, there was a consistent political battle to kind of keep that censored and away from audiences and children. And now you have a film titled Hellraiser that's released throughout the public, all over theaters nationwide, that's introducing the temptation of messing with demons. And again, that's controversial in and of itself, and that's not mentioned enough. But that is why I have Hellraiser at number 3. Now we're at the top 2. I wonder what they're going to be. What do you think they are? Coming in at number 2 is Saw X. Now, this was a hard decision between number 1 and 2, but I'm comfortable with leaving Saw X here, and I'll explain why in a bit. But Saw X, my God, it returned to greatness is what I would say. And again, I love, just like Wrong Turn and the Hellraiser remakes that just recently came out, I love that a new ownership is taking place with the Saw X franchise, where they're going with a different tone and they're respecting the IP. They're not going to exploit it, which I feel previous owners did with the Wrong Turn franchise, Hellraiser, and Saw. Cheap, get them out there, people are going to buy it, and they'll keep coming back. Kind of like what Disney's doing. But anyway, Saw X was Return to Greatness and respect to the whole franchise. And I love when Tobin Bell is on screen. And again, he's not on screen as much in the previous films. He's off and on, but here he's the focal point. And it makes sense because he's such a great actor and he's got great screen presence. And the fact that you sympathize with him because of these people that took advantage of his situation, you feel this bloodlust and you want revenge. You want him to take out our anger on these people. And I think from an emotional balance, it's done wonderfully. We are on his side. We sympathize with him. He is our hero. He is our protagonist. We want him to get away with it and just do these people dirty like they did with him. And we get that. It was also great to see him and Amanda on screen again. I love the chemistry between them two. I love how you have a father figure type of relationship with Amanda and Jigsaw. He sees great in her, but she still has her problems. So he's approaching it from a parent standpoint and a leader. I love that dynamic. And after part 3, when she's no longer part of the franchise, I'm glad they reintroduced her back. Granted, everyone's gotten older. That was not a distraction that I've seen other critics had mentioned to me, but I loved it on screen and it was a wonderful experience. The traps made sense. There was consequences to the traps. Everybody involved who was caught had a chance to survive. They had to do something horrible to their bodies, of course, but they had a chance to survive. The morality, a conflict was present. And again, that's what makes Saw so great. I want more sequels with this new ownership and this new take. I doubt we'll get them because, again, how many stories can we intertwine with Tobin Bell? We know he's dead. How many stories can we inject into that type of timeline? I don't know. But again, it was a wonderful breath of fresh air. I love Saw X, and that is why it is at my number 2. And number 1, in my opinion, out of all 31 of these films, that is the best, is going to be Hellraiser, the remake. Why? It's what a remake should do. It's what a remake ought to do. It's take the existing material, respect it, but add more to it that gives us more clarity on how that world works. Here we have the traditional trap and the traditional box, but now we understand there's stages involved in it. There's a reward if you choose to go with completing the puzzle and following the procedures. I love the attention to detail and the new visuals and how the world, a person can transfer from the reality that we're in into this dimensional hell world. Instead of just walls opening, there's more creativity taken with it, especially in the van sequence. I completely love Riley as a lead in this particular film because she's not your traditional protagonist. She makes mistakes. She's a former drug addict, and she's really not doing well in her life. But again, now she's more or less bestowed this responsibility and trying to complete this game and try to save lives. And she's doing her best. She's making mistakes. Some of her choices are kind of frustrating, but you understand because she's a flawed character and she's only trying to do what is right, which we all can relate to. I love the thought that goes into what's going to torture an individual, like that Void character, I believe is his name, that millionaire. He more or less tells us in a bites, I've completed the puzzle. He wants to feel items because I guess he's so rich, he's kind of lost what it feels like to be a human being. So what do? They attach a device that pulls on his nerves. Holy fucking shit, that's amazing. You wanted to feel something? Well, there you go, damn it. I know a lot of people had a problem with Pinhead being a female. I didn't. I was indifferent to it. As long as there's respect that's taken into the character, I don't care about genders. Like I said, Pinhead was recasted. This is the 3rd time. That second one was pretty much lazy. The second one, in Judgment, I actually enjoyed. It was like a neutral experience. Here, it was a neutral experience as well. It wasn't a pro or a con having a female casted as Pinhead. She filled the role of Pinhead, what Pinhead was supposed to do and say. So it was an indifferent experience, positive or negative, nothing, but it felt normal. She felt like Pinhead to me, and that's all that matters. And I love the rules that it kind of breaks. Again, Riley has this box and she's supposed to stab people with each sequence and move on to the next phase. And instead of stabbing some of her friends like she's being asked to do, she stabs a Cenobite. And you can see the conflict between them both once they're stabbed. Is like, technically she didn't break the rules. So I love the decisions that it takes and that are outside the box that we didn't expect, but you can take them in this world. And that is why Hellraiser the remake is my number 1 of the 31 on 31. I did it. Woo! And I want to take a quick moment to thank Cody, CP, and Brian for allowing me to be part of this festivity. I've seen it as a fan for many years, and now I'm part of it. It's pretty fucking cool. It is a huge task as a creator to watch 31 films, record 31 reviews, and edit 31 reviews within a short amount of time. I applaud them for doing this twice a year. I'll probably do this once, I don't know, but I enjoyed this experience. I'll look forward to being part of this again for next Halloween if they will have me. But sincerely, guys, thanks for letting me be part of this. I enjoyed it and hope to be part of many more. And if you like this video, please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and like the video, put some comments below, and please share. And I look forward to seeing y'all again. I got plenty of reviews coming for y'all, so stay.